Welcome to Follow Me to the MROP, a podcast dedicated to the journey of the masculine soul and the transformative power of initiation. My name is Brian Mueller. I live in suburban Dayton, Ohio, and I made my rites at Pilgrim Park in Illinois in 2014. I'm your host, and in each episode of our show, I'll sit down with one man who has made his rites, and I'll invite him to tell his story. This won't be an abstract explanation or a theological lecture, just a real conversation about what it was like to cross that threshold at the rites and what changed afterwards. This podcast is truly a labor of love, inspired by my own transformative experience at the Men's Rites of Passage and my ongoing commitment to the Illumin community. If this show resonates with you, please take a moment to rate, review, and share it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can find all of those links at mroptalk.com. To support my work, you can explore my published poetry volumes at brianmueller.com. I also work closely with men in Illumin to share and teach the practice of presence. You can learn more about that at choosingpresence.org. Now, the Men's Rites of Passage, or MROP, is an experience designed to help men move from the first half of life into the second, shifting from a focus on ego and achievement to a life of meaning and soul. On this show, we just don't talk about the rites in theory. We talk to the men who have walked the path. Today, I'm joined by a man who has made his rites, and we're going to hear exactly what that journey looked like for him. My guest today is Steve Duncan. Brother, I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for making the time and for being willing to share your story.
It's really special to be with you today, Brian. Thank you.
Steve, tell us where you're from and how you spend your time these days.
Well, right now I'm in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, but I was born and raised and spent most of my adult life in Southern California in eastern LA County. Moved east in 2020 to follow our family and our grandchildren. And so we've been in Gettysburg for about 3 years now and spend time doing a variety of family things and helping with grandchild pickup at school and all those sorts of things. And then getting more and more active in the Gettysburg community, which has been really wonderful.
Thank you. Now let's dive in and talk about the Men's Rites of Passage. The MROP is a unique experience. It's not a retreat or a workshop. It's an initiation. Many men arrive at the rites at a crossroads in their lives, looking for something they can't quite name. Before we dive into the why and the how, let's start at the very beginning. When and where did you make your rites, Steve?
I did it in August of 2015 in Northern California at Camp Tamarack.
And do you recall who the Weaver was and about how many men were present?
Yeah, it was Jim Taylor, and there were about 32, I think.
Now, when you think back to that weekend, what's the first image or feeling that comes forth for you?
Probably one of the larger leaps of faith that I had taken. I knew nothing about the men's work. I knew nothing about Illumin. I was familiar with Richard Rohr and had been to a number of his presentations and conferences and so forth. And I went really in cold to the extent to where I actually intentionally chose not to drive myself. I did a carpool with another man I didn't know, but that also meant that he was in control of the driving. And so I showed up just being kind of totally open.
How would you summarize the entire weekend for you, that experience?
One of the reasons that I went was that I realized shortly after I retired that I really did not have any in-depth male relationships. And I really missed that energy. And starting with the very first evening, and I was just humbled by the men I was with and the gift that it was to be able to be with them in that kind of setting. And then kind of that rolled on through the weekend. I'd never participated in anything remotely close to that kind of event, and I think that energy continued over the course of the event.
Now, without sharing anything that you consider too personal or would be confidential, was there a particular event, ritual that happened that weekend, or was there an encounter you had with another man that really stands out?
Yeah, there a couple. I mean, that first night, just the vulnerability of the men and their sharing. I ended up that first night getting off into some stuff that quite frankly, I'd never shared, but needed to be shared. I needed to share. There was one ritual where I had some personal physical challenges. Not that the ritual itself was necessarily all that physical demanding. And I was feeling kind of self-conscious and at ease. And one of the team came up behind me and just gently kind of put his hands under my shoulders and kind of supported me through that. And I kind of well up a little bit to this day, 11 years later, thinking about that moment. And I've carried that with me.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Now, you alluded to this before, in terms of the circumstances in your life. You had just retired. you were familiar with Richard Rohr, and that kind of led you closer to this experience. But more specifically, what were the circumstances in your life that led you at that particular time to go to a men's rites of passage?
So we had just been fully immersed in our daughter getting married to a wonderful man on the other end of the country, and who grew up in the environment that we're living in now. And I really was looking to have a really close relationship with him, but I suddenly realized that I'd been very accustomed to having work relationships, professional relationships with folks, and I really didn't feel like I had the tools really to kind of build a relationship I really wanted to have with them at that point. And that was one factor. And so I'd asked a friend, a longtime friend who I'd known forever, and I just kind of said, do you have any thoughts, any ideas on this? Because he had three grown sons, and I figured he'd have some good insights. And so he had gone to the rites 5 years before that, and so he recommended that. And in your introduction, Brian, you mentioned the thing that I think Richard Rohr talks about, that for men we have this thing kind of going on inside of us. It's a nagging, it's an urge, it's a feeling. We can't name it, we can't really describe it, but it's something that we know needs to be addressed. And I guess that's what I was kind of feeling.
So you made the decision to attend the rites of passage, and I know you as a dedicated family man. You're very involved with your daughter and her life and your grandkids, and so I imagine you told them that you were going to, your wife and your daughter, and perhaps even a spiritual director advisor, that you were going to the rites. What was their reaction?
Well, at that point, I have to admit, our daughter was living cross country, and while I told her about it, we didn't really get into in detail, but my wife has probably been my biggest cheerleader in terms of doing this. I mean, she was all in before I was all in, quite frankly. And, we're coming up on our 53rd wedding anniversaries this next month. So, she knew what my journey was. And to the extent to where, I mean, she drove me to Los Angeles to drop me off for my ride to the rites. So she was happy to be a part of that. So yeah, she's been an enthusiastic supporter of my participation in Illumin ever since.
So I've never been to Camp Tamarack. I can imagine, having been to some of these rites and these experiences, you're going into a more wilderness setting or natural setting for this event. I'm curious to know how you felt as you pulled up to Camp Tamarack.
So turns out we were the first car to arrive. I think we were actually a little early, but it was up in the high Sierras, beautiful, just amazing area. But yeah, it was rustic, and I guess in a way, the fact of landing in a place like that, and in a way, kind of just being in nature like that, kind of relaxed me a bit, because the team was working hard and the welcome was very gracious and generous. And so I think in many ways that really put me at ease in terms of just settling in and very honestly, just letting it happen.
Did you have any expectations going into the rites or something you wanted to be initiated into?
Wow. I think really it was a matter of really being present to, my relationships with men throughout my life, both family, neighborhood, friends, church, all of that. And looking forward to using that as a way to really challenge me on what my part in that would be. And I figured this would be an experience where there'd be a lot of interaction with men that would help me define that for myself a bit. And probably I figured, given that I'd spent a lot of years trying to be in control of things, it was good for me to not be in control and to not try and predict or judge or control the expected outcome of something. And I think that part of it was really good.
Yeah, that element of control, that resonates for me. But so I was going to ask you, is there anything that you were fearing heading into the rites?
Oh, I think probably, again, particularly, I had no idea what the age range of people would be. And as a kind of new elder, if you will, that old thing of being embarrassed among the younger, fitter guys and so forth. So a little bit of that. I wasn't sure whether I was spiritually equipped or adept for the group that was there. I just really didn't know. And so I think probably a little bit of that was there. But I think, quite frankly, the three of us, because we picked up another fellow on the way up, and we had really a great time in the car. To some extent, it was a small car, so we had all our gear in there, and I think it was kind of like the proverbial clown car as we kind of made our way up the mountain. but we had a good time. But I think that really kind of helped in many ways. I'm really glad I look back on that, and I think that was a great way to start the event for it. I actually recommend to people, try and find somebody to buddy up with on your journey to the rites.
Yeah, so yeah, I don't like to just glaze over the entire event, but so it's a four night, 5 day, parts of 5 days event. It's a big experience, but at some point it does come to an end, and it's time for you now to head out. And like you said, you carpooled with some guys up to Cap Tamarack, so you were leaving with other men. But I am curious to know how you felt immediately after the rites, if not just a few hours, maybe a day or two after that.
The term that just comes to mind is I was really jazzed. I was less tired than I thought I would be, even though sleep was certainly not a big part of the time. I was excited about continuing the work, continuing the relationships, following up with men that were there as I could, and there are a number of them that I have been able to stay in touch with 11 years later. So yeah, I was excited. And the good thing was that I was able to connect right away with a local chapter and continue that shortly after we got back.
So what has changed in your life practically, relationally, spiritually since making your rites?
Well, I think one thing that was I haven't touched upon that was a completely new experience for me was really contemplation. That first contemplative sit we had the first morning, it was when they could still have a fire in that area, which sadly is not so much the case anymore there in California. But to this day, when I have a sit, I will sensorily remember the smell of that fire as I do a sit, and that really opened the door for me in terms of a more full and rich contemplative practice as part of my life. That was really the opening for me at that point, and to do it with a group of men all together like that was really special for me. And even though I do individual work, I mean, I really find the group practice to be particularly powerful for me. And I think the other would be really looking at, I think, broader relationships with men that wouldn't normally be part of my community or circle, if you will. That's been something that I've really appreciated coming out of it. And it really kind of opened the door for that.
Yeah, you mentioned several times the significance of developing relationships, especially with men. So I'm curious to know how have your conversations with men and how have your relationships with men gone since it's the rites?
So I'm an introvert by nature, and so I'm not out there kind of beating the bushes so much, and I'm not a joiner necessarily. So I think it's still a continuing work in progress for me in terms of how best to navigate that relationship territory. One of the things it has done is it's challenged me to take the initiative more in reaching out and connecting, not waiting for the invitation per se. One of the things it's done, it's allowed me to feel more comfortable just showing up places sometimes where I don't necessarily know anything. I think that's how you and I met, quite frankly, where I just showed up. And so I really value that.
So how long did it take you or when did you begin to realize the impact of the rites on your life and on your spiritual journey?
It's different aspects of it have emerged or blossomed at different times. Quite frankly, I think probably the contemplative practice was probably one of the most immediate. The other thing that came out over the course of that work was the absence of grief work in my life. I realized profoundly that I had a lot of that work still to do. And I did kind of get engaged with that in some different ways almost immediately after the rites. That was probably the most powerful one initially.
Have the rites changed your understanding of masculinity, initiation, even the male journey through life?
I don't know if it's changed it, Brian, as much as expanded it and affirmed in some respects. I in my working life, I was exposed in many different ways to the consequences of toxic masculinity and its impacts on people and workplaces and communities. And so I've always had a concern for that. And I think maybe the rites gave me more language on how to describe that and how to engage it when I do engage it, if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
that would be one thing.
Yeah, we came to know each other because you showed up at a writing retreat that we did in Ohio a few years ago. And I know you as a man who's been active in the Illumin community. We were talking about how you had participated as an initiator in the rites where Mike Clausen, one of our previous guests, had made his rites. And I know you've been involved in so many different things. Have you also been involved in the Elder Rites of Passage?
Yes.
When did you do that?
Let's see, that was 2023.
And can I ask you to kind of just tell us why you went on to do the ERP, and then maybe just give men an understanding of what's the difference between the elder rites and the men's rites and why you took that step?
Well, I think I'd actually been considering for some time. I was when we were still living in Southern California, I became aware of the fact that it was being developed and was being offered. And I was interested at that point, but then our move occurred and the pandemic occurred and all that sort of stuff. I think what I'd understood it to be before I went was really not a repeat of the MROP, or even necessarily a building on the MROP, but taking a lot of the same ritual and elements of the format of the MROP, but putting it in the context of work that was specifically for us to do as elders, and not necessarily even by virtue of age. And again, I also, learned from other men that I talked to that there was some, not more, but different kinds of attention to grief work there, which I think, was profound for me. Also found that it built upon some of the work that I did do at the MROP, but I think that was on an more of my own individual basis. Again, I found the rituals there to be particularly meaningful and powerful for me at that stage for me in elderhood. I think the thing that's kind of interesting, Brian, is that for that age group, your needs and the points of intersection of the rites with your life do change based on how you're moving through that elder journey by virtue of whether you're still working, what your family relationships are, your marital or significant other relationships are, what your health is like, because I think, part of what you're now dealing with is some of those issues of mortality that we all have to wrestle with. So I found that to be profound there. And so I was at a different stage with that when I did the elder rites than I was when I went to the MROP.
Yeah, I found it interesting that in recent years, they've developed what they call the Elders Weave to allow men and women to both participate in that. My understanding is that the journey for men and women kind of converges as they get into those later years. Is that your experience as well, or?
I have not participated in the weave. Mine was exclusively men, so I don't know that I can speak to that. I have a spouse who's extraordinarily active in her spiritual life. She's a spiritual director herself. And so we've had a chance to very actively partner in a lot of this work together. So I definitely would agree with you that I think those things do definitely come together. And I presume that since I've understood a lot of men have done the elder weave with their spouse, with their partner, that's been a very powerful process for them.
You touched on something there that I think must be awful helpful is the fact that your spouse is very engaged in her spiritual journey as well. I imagine that makes it a little bit easier for you as well.
Easier, and it holds you a little bit more accountable as well.
Yeah. So, one of the aspects of the rites of passage that I think is so important is that it usually clears some space for a man to get more in touch with his gifts and who he is authentically. And I'm wondering, after you've gotten involved in this and you've been around for about a decade, has it awakened some passions in you, or have you found some gifts that you didn't know you had?
Yeah, I think, or some gifts that I found I could express in different ways. I think I spent a lot of my working life kind of being in the background or being somewhat invisible in some ways, and not really putting myself in a position of people knowing much about me. Quite frankly, that was kind of the nature of my work. And so I think being a little bit more vulnerable about that and being more comfortable stepping out, because the role of being a stoker, for example, helping to guide councils and so forth in the MROP. And I think I did that for you at the one riding retreat, that's something that I both enjoy doing, but I also feel like it's something that I bring some gifts to. And so I've been trying to step into that more. And that's been great. That's been a wonderful gift for me.
Absolutely. Counsel is such an important part of this work. And, I think that's why Illumin has done more work around counsel training. So being a gifted stoker for counsel is wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for that. I do want to ask you also, since you've had both the Elder Rites experience and the Men's Rites of Passage experience, for the man listening and he's considering whether or not to participate in a rites, can you give him some advice about participating in either Rites of Passage and how to make that choice?
I've known men who've done both in a short period of time, and that's worked for them. I mean, one thing that comes immediately to mind for me, Brian, is that since I was already kind of an elder by virtue of age and life position when I went to the MROP, one of the other things I should mention that I forgot to, that I was also looking to make sure I was having relationships with men of a variety of ages and situations in their life, that I wasn't just with men of my own age or my own position, if you will. So that was one of the things I really got out of the MROP, was being able to be with men who were on their journey at all ages. And so that was one aspect of the MROP that I really valued and really got. The EROP was obviously brought together men of more of a similar generation. And so being able to hear their stories and how they were approaching that stage of life was really valuable as well. So I think it may be a matter of, looking at your life now, which area seems to need tending.
So I want to ask you, what keeps you coming back to the rites? What keeps you coming back?
I learned something new about myself on my journey. I find there are things that get awakened to me that I wasn't even aware of by virtue of participating again. I think the rites are so rich that, you don't fully get it all at one time. There will be some aspects of it that really hit home the first time, but don't come back until later. And then I guess the other is every time it's a different group of men. And I find that just awesome to be able to engage with another group of men and just realize how quickly we do engage with each other by virtue of the way the rites work and touch us. So yeah, it's a gift every time.
Yeah, I'm hoping I can ask you a personal question now. How is your relationship with your son-in-law?
Great question, Brian. Actually, it's really good. It's really good. I mean, we still have very different backgrounds and lifestyles and comforts, but I think, we just actually got back from a family vacation with all of the family and grandparents and multi-generational, and we had a great time together. And I think we have a good deal of mutual respect for each other. And so, yeah, it's good. I feel very comfortable. I am very thankful that he's the man in our daughter's life. That's something that I do not take for granted at all. I'm quite thankful for.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I'm going to close this off here. I'm going to read a poem. I've only done this once before, and I'd just like you to, after I read it, to comment on it. I'm going to read it twice. You'll know the poem. But since you came to our writing retreat, and I know you as a writer and a lover of poetry, I thought this would be an appropriate way to end our conversation. So it's called The Way It Is by William Stafford. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. Say a few words about that.
For me, the thread that is so present for me is the relationship with my wife, with Amy. There are times I look back and wonder, why the heck is she still choosing to be with me? And I am so thankful for that choice that she's made. She's been with me through the entire journey, the ups, the downs, challenges with addiction and so forth. And the fact of being able to be spouses, be partners, to have been parents together, to now be grandparents together, that's the thread that is ever present for me.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. 53 years. Congratulations. Brother, I want to thank you deeply for your honesty, your courage, vulnerability, and you giving us, a window on your experience at the MROP and really just more broadly on your life journey. So I love you, brother, and I look forward to seeing you.
I love you too. Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate it.
For those listening who are now feeling a tug in their own soul and are curious to learn more, allow me to share a bit about the history of these rites. The Men's Rites of Passage was originally developed by Father Richard Rohr and was first offered at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico in 1996. While it was supported for many years by the Center for Action and Contemplation, since 2012, Illumin has been the steward of this work, preserving and adapting the rites for men all over the world. To learn more about the history and the theology behind this work, I highly recommend reading Adam's Return by Richard Rohr. If you are ready to make your rites, you can find details and registration information at illumin.org/MROP or illumin.org/events. Finally, if you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to share it with a friend. You can find all our episodes and subscribe in your favorite podcast app at MROPtalk.com. And you can visit me at brianspoems.com or brianmueller.com. Thank you for listening to Follow Me to the MROP. Until next time, brothers, stay present.